Hello out there, all my bookish friends in booktube land. I hope that life is dishing out the goodies for you by the shovel load. In this video, we're going to go through a book haul for April of this year. And there's some exquisite gems amongst all these books for you to look at. So without further ado, let's dig in, shall we? So welcome to April's book haul. I've got 7 delicious goodies for you today. Not that I'll read all of them this month, mind you. However, it's hard not to keep collecting the good stuff, isn't it? So let's start. The first book on our list is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. This one is by Arrow Books and a bit of a drab cover, to be quite honest. However, the story itself has been called the finest American work on the First World War. Novel, obviously. Some even call this the finest love story set in war as well. So that's quite an appealing and exciting prospect. The book itself is written in the first person by an American lieutenant in the Italian Ambulance Corps during the First World War. His name's Frederick Henry. What happens, as I'm led to believe, is he meets a nurse called Catherine Barclay and is very much attracted to her and tries to get close to her, and eventually they fall in love. But of course, war has its issues and Frederick gets himself injured. As a nurse, Catherine has to move through bases and he goes and looks for her and they get closer and closer in their love. I'm not going to spoil the outcome. I do know how it ends, but I'm not going to mention it on this video. In other book lists, I've found that this is classed as one of the love stories that will make you cry your little heart out. And I do like an emotional roller coaster of a book. And Ernest Hemingway has a very particular way of writing, which I enjoy. And it's so straightforward. It's almost unfeeling, despite the fact that it's dealing with traumatic events. I mean, the First World War, for instance, and falling in love. I'm not saying that's traumatic, but it's deep, intense emotions. And I'm looking forward to seeing how Ernest Hemingway handles that, considering his very brusque style and simple style. I thought that something I might try in this video, and if you like it, please comment below and tell me to carry on. Or if you think maybe it's a little too much, then comment as well and give me some guidance, because I want to make this channel for you guys, not just for me. I thought what I'd do is try and read the first paragraph for each book I have in a book haul to give the flavour of the writing style and just an introduction to see if it captures you. So the first paragraph of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway reads like this. In the late summer of that year, we lived in a house in a village that looked across the river and the plain to the mountains. In the bed of the river, there were pebbles and boulders, dry and white in the sun, and the water was clear and swiftly moving and blue in the channels. Troops went by the house and down the road, and the dust they raised powdered the leaves of the trees. The trunks of the trees too were dusty, and the leaves fell early that year, and we saw the troops marching along the road and the dust rising and leaves stirred by the breeze falling, and the soldiers marching and afterward the road bare and white, except for the leaves. A very descriptive piece of writing to open us up into the story. So that's number 1, A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Number 2 on our list is the outstanding Epitaph of a Small Winner by Machado de Assis, or I think it might be Machado de Assis. This book is outstanding, written by a classic Brazilian author in 1880 or 1890, I think it was, and I read the first page of this and enjoyed it so much that even though I only picked it up a few days ago, I finished it a few days ago. The book itself follows a chap called Brás Cubas, who he's dead already. He says that he's a dead writer, not in the term of being a writer who is now expired, but someone who is expired and is now writing his memoirs, looking back on his life. He writes it in almost a diary style way, but it's an incredible critique / satire of a lot of beliefs and the way we live our lives. The chapters are tiny. I mean, look, here you go. Chapter 8 is just that. I think there are 160 something chapters in all. One of the chapters, entitled How I Did Not Become a Minister of State, it's just a bunch of dots. Because he doesn't know how he didn't get his post. What happens in this book, Brass Cubas essentially looks back over a pretty ordinary life, love affairs that he got involved with, how he acted as a child, how he was indulged by his parents, and then ideas and ambitions that he had which either didn't come to fruition or he didn't have the energy to put into making turn out. He meets a whole host of different characters, and basically what he does in this book is he describes everyone's lives. Our lives are not a clearly plotted out story. We don't wake up one day and think, I'm going to make this my deliberate purpose for the next 50 chapters of my life. He just picks on bits that he remembers from life and then creates a philosophy which he weighs up overall to see how good he was at life, what his life amounted to. I'm not going to say much more because probably later on next week I will do a proper review of this book, so please look out for it, and I'll put it up in this corner when it's actually done. He's just an incredible writer. I'll read you the first paragraph, shall I? Chapter 1. The Death of the Author. I hesitated some time, not knowing whether to open these memoirs at the beginning or at the end, i.e. whether to start with my birth or with my death. Granted, the usual practice is to begin with one's birth, but two considerations led me to adopt a different method. The first is that, properly speaking, I am a deceased writer, not in the sense of one who has written and is now deceased, but in the sense of one who has died and is now writing. A writer for whom the grave was really a new cradle. The second is that the book would thus gain in merriment and novelty. Moses, who also related his own death, placed it not at the beginning but at the end, a radical difference between this book and the Pentateuch. So you get an idea from just that opening style that it's very tongue-in-cheek, whimsical, almost irreverent towards life itself. That paragraph alone got me to carry on reading, and I finished the book in quick sticks. What an excellent book. Epitaph of a Small Winner by Macedo Giassis. Third in the book haul is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I've been itching to read this book. It's got so many good reviews from loads of people, and I'm sure in the comments below plenty of you will say how much you enjoyed it. So, what's interesting or piques me about this book is Elizabeth Gaskell's first book, Mary Barton, was interested in the class distinctions of the day between the poor and the wealthy, and it takes on the poor's perspective. In this book, which she had some assistance or advice given to her by Charles Dickens, no less, her heroine, Margaret Hale, hails from the south of England, so a well-to-do background. So she's not coming from the poor perspective. But she heads up to the northern town of Milton, which in the industrial period of Great Britain, lots and lots of mills started up in the north, which historically is a poorer area of Great Britain. And in fact, you have something called the North-South Divide, where the Southerners think of the North as these uncultured rogues and vagabonds, and people from the North think everyone from the South is a Nancy and has no strength and is a milksop, to use an old expression. So Margaret Hale goes up north to a town called Milton, and she becomes impressed by the working class poor who are working in the mills of the day, and their tenacity and their courage, and she begins to champion their cause. She sees the frightful injustice and inequality between the social statuses, and she takes on the owner of a particular cotton mill called John Thornton. And although she is against the way things are run, it becomes a love story because her and Thornton actually like each other despite differing politically and in the way they see things. What is of a special note, and I'm looking forward to exploring, I've been told by a good friend, is that Elizabeth Gaskell in this book does something that a lot of people find hard to do. She doesn't make it simply a case of the wealthy who are running the cotton mills are all terrible people and they have no good bone in their body. And the poor are all wonderful and they have the right idea, huzzah. She balances her characters, from what I've been told. And I love that in an author, an honest author who likes to stand in the middle of the road and try to see things from both sides, not just one, and then write the complications and the nuances of humans who do have values, who do have ethics, and both get things wrong, both get things right. So I'm looking forward to this book, North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So I'll read the first half of the paragraph that opens this book, as it's quite a large paragraph. "Edith," said Margaret gently. "Edith." But, as Margaret half suspected, Edith had fallen asleep. She lay curled up on the sofa in the back drawing room in Harley Street, looking very lovely in her white muslin and blue ribbons. If Titania had ever been dressed in white muslin and blue ribbons and had fallen asleep on a crimson damask sofa in a back drawing room, Edith might have been taken for her. Margaret was struck afresh by her cousin's beauty. But you know, I really like that. Have you ever read a book by a Prime Minister? Well, in fourth place is Sybil by none other than Benjamin Disraeli, one of the most famous of British Prime Ministers in the Victorian period. Benjamin Disraeli entitled this book Sybil or the Two Nations. And what he was talking about was the massive gulf in living conditions between the rich of England and the poor. So vast was the lives that they lived that were different, that he called them the Two Nations. Disraeli hated the inequality that the aristocracy and the poor had between them. He saw it as a completely contemptible thing. He was very much a reformer. He was a supporter of the Chartists who wanted men's suffrage amongst a lot of other things, like not owning great swathes of land in order to be in Parliament. And in this book, he has an aristocratic guy called Charles Egremont. I mean, that says it all, doesn't it? Egremont. You've got to be classy to have a name like that. Charles Egremont meets a girl called Sybil, who is the daughter of someone in the Chartist movement. And also there's a bit of a detective plot going on in here, apparently. I did not know that. Looking at Britain through this lens of Egremont meeting Sybil, this class clash, as it were, Disraeli begins to highlight the situation of the poor, of orphans, of children who work down mines and are just forgotten, compared to some of the brazen, flagrant, heartless attitudes of people in higher society who turn a blind eye to all of this. Now, of course, Charles Dickens had opened the eyes to people to the plight of the street urchin, you know, the orphans of the day in Oliver Twist. Sybil is a book where Disraeli really demands of the reader the need for reform. Things have to change. He describes the disgusting state in which the poor have to live with, you know, no bathroom facilities or sanitary facilities, for instance. I believe it was Disraeli, I'm pretty sure now, in his famous Crystal Palace speech, where he said that the security of the palace, not Crystal Palace, but the King and Queen, the security of the palace depends on the happiness of the cottage or the hovel. So in other words, if you have this gaping gap between the poor and the wealthy landed gentry, there'll be trouble. Something, of course, which manifested itself all too clearly with the French Revolution before Disraeli's time and the Russian Revolution later on. Something that Britain apparently seemed to get sort of half right. I'll take the odds against caravan. In ponies. By the way, ponies is a rough slang term for a kind of banknote. Done. And Lord Milford, a young noble, entered in his book the bet which he had just made with Mr. Latour, a grey-headed member of the Jockey Club. It was the eve of the Derby of 1837. In a vast and golden saloon that in its decorations would have become, and in its splendour would have not have disgraced Versailles in the days of the Grand Monarch, were assembled many whose hearts beat at the thought of the morrow, and whose brains still laboured to control its fortunes to their advantage. So that's how Sybil opens, the day before a horse race. So that's our fourth book, Sybil by Benjamin Disraeli. Fifth up in the hall is Dead Souls by Nickleby. What a great second name, Gogol. This man turned up over a century and a half before Google. What a difference one letter makes. Much as Charles Dickens has the term Dickensian applied to him, Gogol has Gogolian applied to him in his style of writing. Dead Souls has been classed as the funniest Russian novel before the mid-20th century, and apparently can make one guffaw with laughter. However, I don't know much about it, so I'm going to read the back. It says, Russia in the 1840s. There is a stranger in town, and he is behaving oddly. The unctuous Pavel Chichikov goes around the local estates buying up dead souls. These are the papers relating to serfs who have died since the last census, but who remain on the record and still attract a tax demand. Chichikov is willing to relieve their owners of the tax burden by buying the titles for a song. What he does not say is that he then proposes to take out a huge mortgage against these fictitious citizens and buy himself a nice estate in eastern Russia. Will he get away with it? Who will rumble him? Does this narrative contain a deeper message about Russia itself or the spiritual health of humanity? There is much interest and some suspense in considering these issues. But the real pleasure of the story lies elsewhere. It is an enjoyable comic romp through a retarded part of a backward country, a picaresque series of grotesque portraits. Actually, it sounds very much like Dickens. So this really piqued my attention, and I'm looking forward to digging into another Russian author. Can I just ask, have any of you read anything by Gogol? I wonder if the Russians, when writing, used to say, oh, you should goggle it. Let's read the first paragraph, shall we? A small and quite a pretty britchka on springs entered the gates of the hostelry in the provincial city of N.N. It was of the sort in which ride retired colonels, staff captains, landed gentry who own about 200 souls of peasants, and, in a word, by all who are called gentlemen of the middle class. In the britchka sat a gentleman who was neither a beauty nor yet very plain in his personal appearance, neither too stout nor too thin. It was impossible to say that he was old, neither could he be called very young. His arrival produced no commotion whatever in the town, and was accompanied by nothing in particular. And there is the opening part to Dead Souls by Nickleby. Sixth in my book haul for this month is Richard III by William Shakespeare. Oh my goodness. Not only is there no one who writes like Shakespeare, no one who can capture a human being like Shakespeare. The guy was a humanities savant. But this is the Royal Shakespeare Company's own production of the play, with their notes on how it could be staged, how it's been staged in the past, different interpretations. But pushing all that aside, the play, Richard III, is just sublime. It's just brilliant. In a recent video, I did a tag video on bookish superpowers, and I was asked who my favourite bookish villain was, and I said quite confidently, oh, I didn't have to think about this, and picked Cardinal Richelieu. I was only thinking in terms of novels. However, as soon as I saw this and got hold of it, I remembered Richard III, in my opinion, is the best bad guy in all of literature, hands down. No one is like him. He is just... He is the most dark, malevolent, openly wicked, witty, rather amusing and magnetic character you will meet. My first video on YouTube, which I did 2 years ago and then just left my channel for 2 years, was on the opening soliloquy by Richard III. And I heartily recommend you go and watch it. It was badly filmed, but that opening soliloquy is just a masterpiece in language. And if you've never read Richard III, go and get it and read it, because Richard III is stunning in the way it develops a character, in the way it makes you root for the bad guy, even though he's told you he's awful. I really need to do an entire video just summing up the whole of the play, not just a part of it. And I hope to actually do the next scene where he, despite being deformed, woos Queen Anne. Anyway, how does it open? Enter Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasings of a lute. Now he carries on, and it's spectacular what he says. If you worry about Shakespeare because you're not sure about how to understand him, by all means check out my Shakespeare Explained playlist. And if you take the time to get an appreciation for Shakespeare, your love of words and language will multiply 1,000 times. So that was number 6, Richard III by William Shakespeare. Last up is Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. The very first Charles Dickens book I ever read was this one, Nicholas Nickleby. I love this old, I don't know what happened to this here, but I love this old Everyman Read collection from the 1990s. And although this is the only one I have, I'm determined to find all Dickens novels in this style. So if you find them, please give me a shout and tell me where they are. Nicholas Nickleby follows the character Nicholas Nickleby and his sister Kate. After his father dies, the family's plunged into poverty, and it's really down to Nicholas to try and drag them out of it. So he speaks to his uncle, who gets him a job as a schoolmaster with a guy called Waxford Squeers. I mean, is there anything more Dickensian than that name? Waxford Squeers. Now, by the name, you know that Mr. Squeers is not the nicest guy. He's a bit of a rogue. His wife is terrible, as is their son. And Nicholas Nickleby gets embroiled in their affairs, and his sense of justice and his sense of fairness. But what Nicholas Nickleby has is this indefatigable spirit and energy and drive and determination to not only do right, but also to get his family out of trouble, to progress. And so in this book we see Nicholas Nickleby grow his way through society. But, as you can see, it's a large book. On his way through the book, Nicholas will meet a lot of grotesque characters, hilarious characters. If you've read Dickens before, you will know that he has got a very unique squint at society as a whole. He can see in a character what makes them a character. I think he could meet any one of us and find sort of a foible in all of us that he could turn into a grotesque character, because he can pin it down so immaculately that it raises just, it's a bit like a cartoonist can take just the shape of someone's nose or maybe a prominent ear or something about their eyes, and they can absolutely capture the essence of that person just on that one facial feature. Dickens does that with his characters, and in this you've got the Kenwigs, who are quite funny, and then I mean, what an you've got the social climbing, is it the Wittitalies, I believe it's called. What a great name for sort of people who thrive on scandal and gossip, Wittitally. All these characters cross Nicholas's path and affect him in some way, and you see him sort of judging them and weighing them up very much as Dickens is weighing up the people in the Victorian era London around him. So Nicholas Nickleby, what a great book, but I haven't read it for so long. When I first read it, I was 17 years old. So I'm looking forward to revisiting this. The opening paragraph to this work of Charles Dickens reads thus. There once lived in a sequestered part of the county of Devonshire one Mr. Godfrey Nickleby, a worthy gentleman who, taking it into his head rather late in life that he must get married, and not being young enough or rich enough to aspire to the hand of a lady of fortune, had wedded an old flame out of a mere attachment, who in her turn had taken him in for the same reason. Thus, two people who cannot afford to play cards for money sometimes sit down to a quiet game of love. What a brilliant start. While I hope you have enjoyed looking at my 7 books which I've picked up this month, and if any of them appeal to you, tell me which one in the comments below or which ones you may have read, and feel free in the comment section below for everybody else. Tell us what you have picked up this month that you're intending to read. You know, this channel is all about a love of classic literature, so whatever you're into, put it down below. And let's get a little conversation going. But until my next video, I wish you joy in your reading.